The topic for today's discussion is American War of Independence. In this chapter, we have to discuss the following points. Number 1, introduction. Second, the causes for the American War, which is otherwise called American Revolution. Number 3, course of the American Revolution. Fourth point, what were the causes for the failure of Britain in the American War? Then the fifth and the last one, important results. Thus, in this order, we have to discuss the very important chapter, namely American War of Independence. Now, to begin with the introduction, during the 15th and 16th centuries, the European people undertook sea voyages. Such voyages were undertaken by them in order to discover new lands and also new countries. Thus, in this field of exploration, that means finding out new continents, there are two countries were important. First one Portugal and the second one Spain. Now, first country was Portugal. Now, this Portugal at that time that was ruled by the king, namely King Henry IV. This King Henry IV had very much interest in going out into the sea voyages. That was why in the history of Europe he was popularly called King the Navigator. That is, that name itself implies that to what extent he had interest in undertaking sea voyages. Now, this King Henry IV had established a school in which training was given to the sailors. Now, in the school there were many sailors were received training, and among them the first important sailor was by the name Vasco da Gama. This Vasco da Gama, it was he who was responsible for locating and finding out our Indian country. So, the credit goes to Vasco da Gama because this Portuguese sailor had landed in India, as a result of which in our country many Portuguese settlements were established. Thus, the relation between India and Portugal had been strengthened due to the visit of the first Portuguese king, namely Vasco da Gama. That was the discovery made by the country, namely Portugal, in the field of exploration. Then second to the Portugal in the field of exploration was Spain. Now, we had seen Portugal had discovered India. The credit goes to Vasco da Gama, but Vasco da Gama finally located or discovered India by sailing in the western direction. Now, the second country was Spain. At that time, Spain was ruled by the royal couple, namely Queen Isabella and her husband Ferdinand. This couple had the desire of locating India, but their aim was they wanted to find out an alternate eastern route to India. Since already a western route was discovered by Vasco da Gama, their ultimate aim was to find out an eastern route to India. Hence, this royal couple, they had sent a sailor by name Christopher Columbus. Now, this Christopher Columbus had been provided 3 ships and also 88 men, whose ultimate aim was to find out a eastern route to India. Accordingly, finally, Christopher Columbus set sail from the place called Palos to find out his aim of locating India. So, he started his sea voyages in 3 ships along with his fellow 88 sailors from the place called Palos. So, thus he started his voyages, and unfortunately, though he went on sailing for more than 3 months, he could not locate neither India nor any part of the world. That means his mission was a failure. Hence, already they were on the sea for more than 3 months. These fellow sailors compelled Columbus to return back to Spain because they could not locate neither India nor any part of the world. At the last moment, finally Columbus located some land, and when he had found out some land, immediately in his eagerness he called the land located by him was India. Not only that, the people who were living on that land, they seemed to be red in color, hence Columbus called them Red Indians. That was the discovery made by the second country, namely Spain. So thus Columbus thought he had located India, and also he named the people as Red Indians. That was the discovery made by the second country, Spain. But after this discovery of Columbus, another sailor came. He was from the land of Italy. Now this Italian sailor, he had revealed an important fact. Now the fact revealed by him was the land discovered by Columbus was not at all India. On the other hand, really it was the land of American continent. That means an entirely new continent had been discovered by Columbus. So the credit goes to this Italian sailor, because it was he who had revealed the fact to the world. Now the name of the Italian sailor who had revealed the fact, that his name was Americo Vespucci, and that was why the American continent came to be called after his name. Now in those days, America was regarded as a new world, because hitherto it was not located or discovered by anyone. Hence American continent was considered or regarded a new world. Thus that is the discovery made by the Americo Vespucci, after which America was called today. Now after the discovery of America, many people came and settled here. Now among them, the first people who landed in the new world of America was British. They were the first one to land on the coast of America. Following them, many more European people came and settled. As a result, in the new land of American continent, there were many people who all of them settled along the northern coast of America. This was the history of the colonialization of the new world of America. As a result, along the northern coast, both the British and the Europeans, they had settled or they had founded 13 colonies. Now these 13 colonies in course of time came to be called the American continent. This is all about the first point, namely introduction. Then the second one. Now along the, we have seen there were 13 colonies which was settled both by the Europeans as well as the British. 13 colonies had been divided into 3 divisions. They are the first one southern colonies, second one northern colonies, and the third one middle colonies. Thus these 3 divisions were given to the 13 colonies in the American continent. In the south and the northern colonies, the people along these colonies were the original people from Britain. Now these people from Britain who had settled in the American colony, they had occupied and settled both the southern and the northern colonies. But the last one, namely the middle colonies, it was here the people from various parts of Europe, namely France, Italy, Germany, and all other European people came and settled in the middle colonies. Hence they were the majority in number. But in course of time, there were some differences between these 13 American colonies against the mother country Britain. The reason was policy followed by the mother country Britain was not at all liked by the colonial people of America. Hence there was a war between the 13 American people against the mother country Britain, and in the history of Europe that war came to be called the American War of Independence. And about this American War of Independence, this is a quotation to quote, "The history of the American Revolution would be a history of mankind during that epoch." So thus, so far we have discussed the first important point, namely introduction. Second, we shall take up the what are the causes for the American War or the American Revolution. Now the causes can be classified into three divisions. First cause being conditions in the colonies. Second one, the British aggressions on the Red Indians. But the most important cause for the American war was the policy of Britain, that is the mother country. Thus, these were the three causes for the American Revolution. Now, to start with, namely the first cause, namely the conditions in the colonies. So, in total, there are 13 colonies, as we already discussed. Among the 13 colonies, both the south and the north were occupied by the original people from Britain. As such, since they belonged to Britain, they had some attachment for the mother country Britain. But the majority of them were the last one, namely the middle colonial people, which was completely dominated by people of Europe. Naturally, they came from many parts of Europe. As such, these majority people did not have any attachment for the mother country Britain. As a result, that resulted in the American War of Independence. Now, in course of time, the population of the 13 colonies increased, and the reason for that increase in the population was, in those days, America was simply called the land of freedom, opportunity and power. So, since these three things, namely freedom, opportunity and power, are available in the new continent, new world of America, more and more people came and settled along the American colonies. So, in short, that means the population had increased very much. Now, the new people who came into the American continent, they had settled along the Appalachian mountains. But these Appalachian mountains belonged to the Red Indians. They were the real owners of Appalachians. Hence, these Red Indians did not like the arrival of the new people in their land. As a result, there were frequent wars between the Red Indians and the new people of the American continent. Now, the mother country Britain, she wanted to avoid such frequent wars. Hence, in order to avoid these wars, she in 1863 she had issued a proclamation, namely the Royal Proclamation. Now, by this Royal Proclamation, Britain, the mother country, she had clearly told that the new people who had settled in the new continent of America, they should not move beyond the Appalachian mountains. So, the basic aim of mother country Britain was to avoid the frequent clashes between the two people. But on the other hand, the American people thought it was an attempt which was made by the mother country to prevent their basic freedom of movement. Simply, the mother country was making to prevent their freedom of movement. Hence, they did not like the Royal Proclamation. That was the first clash of opinion between the American people and the mother country Britain. Then, in course of time, as we discussed, the population went on increasing, and second cause for the American war was the mother country Britain. She had followed many series of measures to impose their authority on the 13 colonies. Now, we shall take up the second cause, namely British aggressions on the Indians. Britain, the mother country, she felt that the Red Indians, they were always under their control. Naturally, they were the natural native people of America. Hence, the Indians always supported the mother country Britain. But on the other hand, the 13 people who came from many parts of Europe, they were all freedom-loving people. Simply, they did not want any control on them by the mother country. Hence, it was this basic rivalry that led to the American war between the two. As a result, there were frequent difference of opinion between the 13 people and the mother country Britain. Now, the Indians who supported the mother country, as a result, the 13 people suspected that these Indians, they were encouraging difference of opinion between the two, that is the mother country and the American people. Further, the American government, because of their suspicion, frequently raided the houses were raided. These American people, they found out many arms and ammunitions which bore British marks on them. Now, because of the discovery of these arms and ammunitions, the American felt the Red Indians were supporting the British against their own people. And further, under these conditions, there was a strong rumor among the 13 colonies people. The strong rumor was, if one American citizen was killed by the Red Indian, then the mother country Britain, she was paying to the Red Indians at the rate of $13 per head. So such was a strong rumor being floated among the colonial people. Now they felt the Indians were aiming to kill the American people. As a result of this suspicion, there was rivalry and suspicion among the Indians and the native people of America. That is the second cause. Now, the third and the real cause for the American War of Independence was policy of Britain, that is the mother country. Now, at that time, Britain was ruled by the British King George III. And what about the King George III? Naturally, the King George III, he followed the policy, namely imperial policy towards the 13 people of America. By the imperial policy, the king thought that all the people were under his own control, as such they were all subordinates. And the second one, the imperial policy, the king insisted that the 13 people must send their requirements only through the government of Britain, and as such he was the supremacy or supreme power over the 13 colonies. And the next development for the American war was, during the years 1760 to 1763, the government of Britain, she had passed 3 important acts. Those acts were called by the name Navigation Acts. So in total there were 3 Navigation Acts. By the first Navigation Act, the mother country Britain, she had told the 13 colonies that if at all they wanted any goods from Britain, and such goods should be imported only through the ships of Britain or the foreign countries. That was the first Navigation Act. Then the second Navigation Act, the American people, they were producing large number of goods, and such goods were in great demand among the European people, and hence the European people offered good amount of money to obtain the goods from American colonies. Now the mother country wanted to avoid the trade between the both. Hence, by the second act, the government clearly told all the goods produced by the 13 people should be compulsorily sent only to the mother country Britain, and these goods need not be sent to any foreign country. That was the second Navigation Act. Then the third and the last Navigation Act was, in the first act the government had given the option in getting the European goods, use either the foreign ships or the American British ships in their foreign trade. Now in the third act, that was modified. In the third Navigation Act, the mother country Britain clearly instructed that only the British ships should be used for getting anything from other foreign country. So thus these were the 3 Navigation Acts. Now the 13 people, they understood that these 3 Navigation Acts had clearly curtailed their freedom of trade and commerce, because carrying out the trade with the European people was clearly affected. As a result, the 13 people now felt that there was no effort by the mother country to remove these conditions. So in short, these 3 Navigation Acts had clearly curtailed their freedom of choice and freedom. That is the next one. Then the next development for the American war was, already we have seen in course of time the population of the American countries increased. That was so. In those days, because America was called a land of freedom, opportunity and power. To control the large number of population in the 13 colonies, the mother country Britain, she had followed many other measures. By this time, in the American colonies, the mother country Britain, she had passed an act, namely Sugar Act. Now, the attempt or the effort of the government in bringing the Sugar Act was, by the Sugar Act, she had reduced the tax on sugar. So, there was a good measure, the tax on the sugar was reduced, but the real motive of Britain was, while reducing the tax on sugar, at the same time, the tax on other commodities had been increased very much. That was the ulterior motive of the British government. Though the tax on sugar was reduced, at the same time the tax on other goods were increased. That means the colonial people had to pay more and more tax for other commodities. So that is the first one, namely the Sugar Act. Then the Sugar Act was followed by the second one, namely the Stamp Act. Now what about the Stamp Act? Now previously the colonial people, they had the option to use any quality of the stamp, but now by the Stamp Act brought out by the mother country Britain, the government of Britain clearly told, whenever the colonial people used any official documents, they must compulsorily affix the stamp of Britain on all the legal documents. So that is the Stamp Act. So hence it was told, Sugar Act made the people to think, but the Stamp Act to talk. So what is the meaning? By the Stamp Act, the people had been prevented. They should not use their own stamp. On the other hand, they should compulsorily use only the stamp of Britain. So it indirectly means putting the stamp of Britain on the legal documents means that you have to accept that the 13 people were still under the control of the mother country Britain. But this kind of condition was not acceptable to the 13 colonies. Basically, they were all freedom-loving people and they wanted to be free and independent in the new colonies of America. But now, when the mother country compelled them to be under their own control, that was not acceptable to them. Hence, they immediately held a meeting or a congress, that is what was known as Stamp Act Congress. Now the Stamp Act Congress was held in the city of New York. In the Stamp Act Congress, a resolution was passed. That resolution was called, so the phrase no taxation without representation, that means though we are paying large number of taxes to the mother country Britain, still they did not have any representation in the British Parliament. That means the colonial people did not have any chance. There was no member to represent their grievances in the British Parliament. So simply the purpose or the aim of the colonial people was they wanted representation in the British Parliament. That was why they held the Stamp Act Congress. But what was the response of the mother country Britain? The people wanted representation in the British Parliament. Now the reply given by the mother country Britain was, Parliament is a common forum in which all kinds of people were represented. So the government simply replied, in Parliament there were large number of representatives, and through the large representatives the 13 people were also given representation. That was the reply given by the mother country. But finally, accepting the demand of the 13 colonies, the mother country clearly rejected, or it had dropped the Stamp Act. But though it had removed the Stamp Act, immediately the government passed another act, namely Declaratory Act. Now by the Declaratory Act, the government confirmed that she was the mother country for them. As such, she had the right to pass any law on the 13 colonies. That is the Declaratory Act. So that means as the mother country, she had every right to pass any law for the 13 colonies. That is the next move. But the next important movement in the American War of Independence was, now by this time in the government of Britain, a new finance minister came. His name was Charles Townshend. This Charles Townshend, this new finance minister, or in other words, the Chancellor of Exchequer, he brought some acts. Those acts brought by the new finance minister, they were simply called Townshend Acts. So, the new minister Charles Townshend brought some acts, they were simply called Townshend Acts. What was the purpose? This Townshend Act, which was brought by the finance minister, by the Townshend Act, the mother country Britain, she had put new taxes on some commodities like sugar, tea, paper, paint and wood. On all these commodities, the mother country, she had put new taxes. What was the reason? Why did the mother country put new taxes on the commodities? The reason told by the government was, in the 13 American colonies, there were some British people, some British officers, they were serving in the 13 colonies. So, these British officers, they had to be paid monthly salary. Now, the reason told by the government of Britain was, in order to pay salary to the British officers serving in the 13 colonies, Townshend was now putting taxes on these new commodities. But the 13 people, they had already decided not to pay any more tax. Already they are represented, they wanted representation, that was rejected by the mother country Britain. Now Townshend brought the Townshend Act, and now the 13 colonies had finally resolved not to pay any more tax to the mother country. So government putting new tax, on the other hand the people rejecting the new taxes. So the result was, there was violence in the 13 colonies. Particularly that violence was very severe in the city of Boston. As a result of that violence in the city of Boston, 5 people had been killed by the British Army. Now this incident, that is the killing of 5 people by the British Army, in American history, that was called Boston Massacre. As a result of this Boston Massacre, finally the finance minister Charles Townshend had withdrawn his taxes, but at the same time the tax on tea alone was not cancelled. That means the tax on tea alone was retained, while the other commodities were cancelled by the finance minister. Then the next and the last cause for the American war was Boston Tea Party. Now this Boston Tea Party, this East India Company, that was owned by the government of Britain. This East India Company had large quantity of tea products with them. With the permission of the government, the East India Company had sent huge tea products to the harbor of Boston. Now the British ships which were laden with the tea products, they had arrived in the harbor of Britain. When the British ships arrived in the Boston harbor, some colonial people, they were all in disguise as Red Indians, all of them boarded into the British ships, and after getting into the ships, these colonial people, they began to throw away the tea products into the sea. So that incident was popularly called Boston Tea Party. That means throwing away of the tea products into the sea. That was popularly called in the American history as Boston Tea Party incident. That was the next and the last one for the American War of Independence. Simply the 13 people had destroyed the property of the British government. Then the next movement was, since the people had destroyed of their government property, as a result the mother country Britain, she had followed many hard and severe measures. Now those severe measures taken by the mother country Britain in American history, they were known as intolerable acts. Now what about those intolerable acts? Now the first intolerable act taken by the government was, the government first of all closed the Boston harbor itself. The whole incident had happened in the harbor of Boston. Hence the first intolerable act was, the government of Britain first of all closed the Boston harbor. That was the first intolerable act. Then the second intolerable act followed by the government of Britain was, the state of Massachusetts was brought under the control of military rule. And the third and the next one, General Gage, who was noted for his very severity, he was appointed commander of the state of Massachusetts. Now these were the very severe measures which were termed by the 13 people as intolerable acts. Then the next stage in the American war was the 13 colonies, they are now resolved to start the War of Independence. Hence, they held a congress or a meeting which is popularly called the Continental Congress. Now this Continental Congress that was held in May 1774 in the city of Philadelphia. And in this Continental Congress, the 13 colonies, they had finally come to the point of starting the American War of Independence against the mother country Britain. That was the first one. Then there was the second Congress in the same city of Philadelphia in September 1774. In the second Congress, these 13 people, they had appointed George Washington. He would be the commander of their own colonial army. Thus finally the 13 people had started the preparations for the American War of Independence. Now while they were doing all these military actions, or while they were taking all these measures, on the other side they also wanted to represent their grievances to the British King George III. Hence they presented a petition. That petition was called by the name Olive Branch Petition. In the Olive Branch Petition, the 13 people had represented their grievances and they wanted remedy from the British King George III. But though the king received the representation from people, he simply rejected the representation, and not only that, the king simply called them radicals. That means the democratic norms of the 13 people had no response from the British king, and hence finally the 13 people had no other alternative except to start the War of Independence in 1775. And now this is the causes for the American War of Independence. When the American War was about to be started, by this time in the American colonies a book was published. The name of the book was Common Sense, and that book was written by an author, namely Thomas Paine. Book Common Sense, he had clearly outlined the people were about to start the War of Independence, and if they succeeded in the American war, what would be their future benefits. That means what all they are going to enjoy if they won in the American War of Independence. So these are the causes for the American War of Independence. Then the next one about the course of the war. Now the war started in 1775 between the 13 colonies against the mother country Britain. Here the colonial army was led by the General George Washington, and on the other side, on the opposite camp, British army was led by Cornwallis. In between the two, the first battle happened at the place called Bunker's Hill. Unfortunately, in the first battle at Bunker's Hill, Washington suffered a defeat. But the important turning point of the American war was that battle at the place called Saratoga. Here at Saratoga, Washington, he succeeded over the British army. That means he suppressed and won a decisive victory against the mother country Britain. And as a result, finally, the war came to an end in 1783 by the Treaty of Paris. Now, the American War of Independence finally came to an end by the Treaty of Paris. Next one, we have to discuss what about the important results of the American War of Independence. Now, the very first important result was the birth of USA. That is, the 13 colonies had now given birth to an independent country, namely United States of America, and that is why that is frequently told there would be 13 stripes and 50 stars in the American flag. 13 stripes representing the 13 old colonies, and the 50 stars meaning the present states of 50 in the United States of America. Then the second result, after independence, America now had a written constitution. Now the significance of the American constitution is they had included an important annexure, namely Bill of Rights, which had guaranteed fundamental freedom to the people of America. Then the third result, financially, capitalism was the policy of Britain. Then the fourth result, this war was one of the causes for the French Revolution of 1789. Then the fifth one, the British King George III, after the American War of Independence, he changed his policy. Previously, before the war, he follows the imperial policy, but now after the American War, he began to follow new colonial policy. Then the next and the last result of the American War was, on seeing the success of the 13 colonies, the other countries which were under the control of Britain, namely India, Indonesia and Malaysia, they also started war of independence in their own respective countries. So these are the important results of the American War. Then the next and the other one, we have to discuss what were the causes for the failure of Britain in the American War of Independence. Now, when the 13 colonies declared the American war against Britain, the people generally thought they would be defeated very soon. Why was it so? Because as we are aware, the British government, she was a supreme power all over the world, and practically she was controlling the entire continent, and that was why simply Britain was called a land where the sun never sets. But at the end of the war, what happened was, it was the British power that had been defeated in the American War of Independence. Now, about the causes for the failure of Britain in the American War, the very first cause was distance. In between the 13 colonies and the mother country Britain, there was the long distance of more than 3,000 miles. Now, the entire war had happened only on the American soil. As a result, the long distance of travel that were undertaken by the British Army and the British soldiers naturally affected their efficiency. So that was the first cause for the failure of Britain. Then the second cause, even after landing in the American continent, that was quite new to the British Army. They did not know anything about the geography, soil or climate of American continent. That means they had to fight in a new distance unknown land. On the other hand, since it was their own mother country, the American army fought well, better than their British counterpart. Then the third cause for the British failure was character of George III. Really, it was he responsible for the American war, and from the very beginning, he was treating the people as subordinates. On the other hand, the real fact was they were very well educated and civilized. So the real credit goes to George III himself, because he was to blame squarely for this American war. Then the next cause for the British failure was, after the battle at Saratoga, other European countries, mainly France, Russia, Spain and other European countries, helped the success of the 13 colonies. They provided both financial and military help, and as a result of this European help, finally the 13 colonies succeeded in the American war. Then the next and the other cause for the British failure was, the British officers and the British government, there was lack of cooperation and coordination between them. Naturally, the army was responsible for conducting the war. On the other hand, the British officers did not render any help for the British army, and that is the main reason for the failure of Britain in the American War of Independence.